I thought I was just celebrating my success, sipping mint tea on the balcony of my new apartment, listening to the distant hum of the city and the soft clink of cutlery from downstairs. I had no idea that by the end of the week, my own relatives would be circling like vultures around the keys to this very building, quietly reshaping my life into a scheme they had been planning for years. The first real sign that something was wrong came the evening my cousin, Lauren, showed up at the door with a bottle of sparkling wine and a smile that looked just a little too bright. Her perfume clung to the air, something sweet and cloying, like cheap roses drenched in vanilla, overpowering the subtle scent of the lavender soap I had scattered across the apartment that morning. She hugged me too tightly, her fingers pressing into my shoulders in a way that felt more like a claim than a greeting. "We're so proud of you, Clara," she said, her voice cooing through the foyer as she stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "An entire building, all under your name. It's not just an investment, it's a legacy." At the time, I brushed it off as typical family admiration. My name was Clara, I was 33, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had something solid I could finally call mine. The apartment building I owned sat on a quiet side street in a gentrifying part of the city, a small cream-colored 5-story structure with wrought iron balconies and ivy crawling up the lower walls. It had once been my grandmother's, a modest rental that had quietly grown in value over the decades until, 3 years ago, I had inherited it after she passed away. She had left it to me with a crooked smile and a warning I hadn't fully understood then. "Be careful with this house, Clara. It's not just bricks and mortar. It's the way people look at you." For me, owning the building meant freedom. I had spent years bouncing between shared flats and short-term leases, always one bad landlord or one rent hike away from being uprooted. My job as a graphic designer paid well by local standards, but it never felt like enough to count on when every month the balance in my account stretched tighter than a drum. The building changed that. Even with a few vacancies, the monthly rent covered not only my mortgage, but also a small buffer I kept in a savings account marked emergency. More than that, it gave me a sense of permanence. I could walk through the Iron Gate entrance, past the faded residents-only sign, and know that the worn-down elevator and the mismatched mailboxes behind the glass door were mine. Mark, my husband, had been my anchor through all of it. He was 38 with a steady job at a mid-sized law firm and a calm, measured way of talking that made most people feel he was always 10 years older than he actually was. He had met me at a friend's birthday party 6 years earlier, and we had fallen into a routine so quietly that I barely remembered the moment we decided to live together. We shared a small 2-bedroom flat a few blocks away from the building, and when I inherited it, his first instinct had been to reach for his tablet and start calculating numbers. "You're set," he said, tapping the screen with his thumb. "If you keep the tenants you have and don't overspend on renovations, this place will pay for itself for years." His mother, Brenda, had always struck me as tolerable in that vague, distant way that some relatives are. She was in her late 60s, with carefully dyed hair that shifted between shades of brown so often that I had stopped trying to keep track. She wore thick eyeshadow and a perfume that overlapped too much with Lauren's, something floral and heavy, like fabric softener that refused to fade. Brenda smiled a lot, but her eyes rarely kept up with her lips. There was a hardness in them, a kind of watchful calculation that only appeared when certain topics came up: money, property, what's fair. Up until the week everything started to unravel, I thought of our family relationships as complicated but manageable. My own parents were gone, my father 10 years before, and my mother 5, leaving me with a small circle of relatives I saw mostly at funerals, birthdays, and the occasional awkward lunch. Lauren, on the other side of my family, had always been present, but never particularly close. She was 10 years older than me, with a daughter in college and a second-hand car dealership business that she liked to describe as thriving. We visited each other every few months, exchanging polite questions and small talk, but never really digging into anything deeper. I didn't know then that behind closed doors, they had been talking about me. The first real tremor came on a Tuesday evening when I was sitting on the living room couch with my laptop open, going through the list of tenants for the month. The glow of the screen reflected in the darkened window, cutting across the warm light of the floor lamp beside me. Mark sat at the dining table, flipping through a thick folder of case files, his glasses slipping down his nose every few minutes. The TV hummed quietly in the background, playing a legal drama neither of us was really watching. The air smelled faintly of the garlic butter pasta we had eaten an hour earlier, and the soft clinking of the dishwasher finishing its cycle punctuated the silence. My phone buzzed on the table, and I saw Brenda's name flash on the screen. "Brenda," I said, picking up. "Everything okay?" "Oh, sweetheart, of course," she replied, her voice already hovering on the edge of fake nonchalance. She had a habit of starting conversations that way, as if she were apologizing for the fact that she was even speaking. "I was just thinking about you, that's all. Lauren mentioned you bought that little building, your grandmother's place, right?" "Yes," I said carefully, feeling the faint prickle of unease crawl up the back of my neck. "I inherited it. It's not really bought. It's more like passed down." "Passed down," she repeated, as if tasting the words. "That's nice. It's nice to think of things being passed down. It keeps families together, you know." There was a pause. I heard the faint hiss of the kettle in the background, the clink of a spoon against a mug. "Clara," she said after a moment, softer now, like someone lowering the volume on a particularly loud thought. "I was wondering if you ever thought about expanding your family's share in that building." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "It's just," she continued, "you're so young, and property like that can be so much to manage on your own. Mark and I have been talking about how wonderful it would be if more of the family could be involved. You're not married to that building, you're married to my son. We should all be part of this." Her words landed like stones in shallow water, heavy and obvious enough to make me tenser, but not so obvious that I could call them out for what they were. "You mean," I started, trying to sound calm, "you mean you want to live there?" "Oh, no," she said quickly, too quickly. "I wouldn't push you out of your own home." "Of course not. I just meant that perhaps in the future, your future children might need a place, or maybe Mark's younger brother could have a unit. It's not just about now, Clara. It's about the future, about what we build together." I forced a polite laugh, the kind of sound people make when they don't know what else to do but don't want to reveal that they're uncomfortable. "We'll see," I said. "Right now, I'm just trying to keep the tenants happy and the place in order." "That's my girl," she said, and I could hear the smile again, that same too bright, too careful curve of her voice. "We'll talk about it again. Don't worry, you'll come around." I hung up and put the phone down on the couch, staring at the screen of my laptop for a moment longer. The numbers still glowed, the list of tenants, the rent amounts, the due dates, all neatly arranged. To me, they represented stability. To others, apparently, they represented something else entirely. I didn't realize then that this was the first brick falling. Over the next few days, little things started to feel off. Not dramatic, not Hollywood level, just the kind of background noise that people usually learn to ignore. Mark got a call from Lauren on Thursday evening, and he stepped out onto the balcony to take it, his voice low and muffled by the glass door. I was in the kitchen, washing the dishes, the faint scent of mint-scented dish soap mixing with the steam rising from the sink. When he came back inside, his face was a little tighter than usual, his shoulders hunched, as if he were carrying something heavier than a phone conversation. "Everything okay?" I asked, turning off the tap. "Yeah," he said. "Just family stuff." "You and Brenda?" He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "Lauren, mostly. She wanted to talk about some legal angle on property. Said something about advantages of joint ownership." The word joint stuck in my head like a burr. "Joint ownership," I repeated slowly. "Of what?" "Nothing major," he said, already moving toward the couch, as if the distance between us would soften the edge of the conversation. "Just that, in some cases, if you bring in family, it can reduce taxes or simplify things if something happens." Something happens. The phrase sat like a cold stone in my stomach. I walked over and sat beside him, the couch creaking softly under my weight. The TV was still on, the legal drama now in the middle of a tense courtroom scene, but I wasn't really seeing it. "Claire," he went on, "I'm not saying you have to do anything. I'm just telling you what she said. It's just an idea." I looked at his hands, folded in his lap, the way his fingers twitched slightly when he was trying to downplay something. He had a habit of avoiding eye contact when he was hoping a conversation would end. "Why is Lauren talking to you about this?" I asked. "Why not me?" "She knows lawyers talk lawyers," he said with a small, practiced smile. "I'm just the middleman." "Middleman for what?" He shifted. "I don't know. Maybe she just wanted another perspective. She's not trying to cause trouble, Clara." I nodded, but the words did not settle. From that moment on, whenever someone mentioned the building, I noticed the way Mark's posture changed, the way his voice dropped an octave, the way he looked at me just a moment too quickly before turning away. He started talking about family obligations more often, about fairness, about what's best for everyone. I told myself I was being paranoid. At work, I tried to focus, but the thoughts kept circling. My office was a small, bright space on the third floor of a converted brick building, the walls painted in a soft beige that made the digital screens on my desk look even brighter. The air smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner, and the steady clack of keyboards from the other designers drifted through the thin walls. I had a deadline for a rebranding project that week, and I threw myself into it, letting the colors and logos and carefully measured grids fill the space in my head where worries about the building kept trying to creep in. On Friday evening, I decided to visit the building in person. I liked going there alone, when the hallway was quiet and the only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerators in the units and the occasional creak of footsteps above. I walked up the slightly uneven wooden staircase, the handrail cool under my palm, the scent of old carpet and lemon-scented floor cleaner wrapping around me. The light in the hallway was a little dim, the ceiling fixture flickering as if it were tired of being used, but the familiarity of the space still soothed me. I checked the mailboxes, the way I always did, and noticed that the envelope on the bottom right had my name on it, written in a handwriting I didn't recognize. It was thick, the kind of envelope that felt important in your hand. I opened it carefully, the paper tearing with a soft sound, and pulled out a glossy brochure. The cover read in bold, elegant letters, "Family Nest Properties, your partner in generational wealth." Below, in smaller text, "We specialize in helping families pool their property assets for long-term stability and shared benefit." I turned the page, my fingers tightening around the edges. Inside were smiling faces of couples and children, standing in front of houses and apartment buildings, all of them holding keys or signing documents. The brochure went on to explain how family-centered property strategies could reduce taxes, protect against inheritance disputes, and ensure that no member of the family is left behind. There was no return address, no company logo, no contact information, only a stamped note at the bottom in a different hand. Ask Mark about this. It's a good option for you. The words were written in the same handwriting as the envelope. I stared at the note for a long time, my hand starting to tremble, the brochure feeling suddenly heavier than it had a second ago. My breath caught in my throat, and the air in the hallway seemed to grow thicker, pressing against my chest. The faint buzzing of the ceiling lights sounded louder now, each flicker cutting through the silence like a warning. Family Nest Properties, I whispered to myself, my voice barely above a breath. I clutched the brochure and turned toward the stairs, my legs moving almost automatically. The stairs creaked under my shoes, the wood groaning as if it, too, knew that something was shifting. As I stepped out through the front door, the cool evening air hit my face, but it didn't feel refreshing. It felt like a current warning me that I was stepping out of one world and into another. By the time I got home, my mind was racing. Was this a joke? A misunderstanding? A coincidence? Or had someone already started moving the gears of something much bigger, quietly, without waiting for my permission? I didn't know then that the building was the anchor, and someone else had already begun to test the water. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, the faint outline of the fan blades rotating lazily above us, I turned toward Mark and asked the question that had been gnawing at me for hours. Family Nest Properties, I said quietly. Have you heard of them? He froze for just a moment, then rolled onto his side to face me, his silhouette blurred in the dim light filtering through the blinds. His eyes were half closed, but I could see the sharpness in them, the way he blinked once, slowly before answering. Where did you hear that name? He asked, his voice careful. In an envelope, I said. In the building's mailbox. It said, ask Mark about this. It's a good option for you. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I didn't send that, he said, then added, I didn't write that note, but I might have mentioned the idea to Lauren. To Lauren, I repeated. She wanted to know if there were any companies that help with family property arrangements, he said. I gave her a few names. I didn't think she'd actually send anything. I tried to keep my voice steady. Why did she need that? He hesitated again. I don't know. Maybe she was thinking of her own situation. You know how she is, always looking for angles. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, the fan's gentle hum now feeling like a mocking echo of my own thoughts. Something was wrong. The names, the timing, the secrecy. It all fit together like pieces of a puzzle that had been forced into place, not gently arranged. You didn't talk to Brenda about this? I asked. Of course not, he said quickly. Why would I? I didn't answer. I just listened to the hum of the fan and wondered how many other conversations I hadn't heard, how many plans were being made behind closed doors, using my name as if it were currency. The next morning, I walked into the small cafe on the corner deliberately, the one with the chipped blue paint and the chipped mug I always sat at. The smell of freshly ground coffee and cinnamon rolls filled the air, wrapping around me like a protective blanket. The barista nodded at me as I ordered, and I took my usual spot by the window, the warm ceramic mug heavy in my hands. I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank and property management accounts, wanting to see the numbers again. the hard facts that couldn't lie. The accounts were all in my name. The deeds, the registration, the rental agreements, everything carried my signature, my initials, my choices. And yet, as I typed, a small notification popped up on the side of my screen, one I had never seen before. Account activity, property access request. I clicked it, my heart starting to pound in my chest. A new window opened, a request form flagged as family type access to a shared property portal. The requester was listed as Lauren Mitchell, family relation cousin, with a short note attached, requesting temporary access to review income and maintenance records for future planning. The request was pending. I stared at the screen, at the little checkbox that would grant or deny her entry, and felt the ground beneath me tilt, just slightly. This was no accident. This was the first real crack in the wall. I opened the online property portal the next morning, my hands still cold from the shock of the previous night's discovery. The screen blinked with the usual login page, a simple blue and white interface, the name of the portal emblazoned in the corner, its logo a stylized house outline. I typed in my credentials, my fingers moving automatically, but this time, the usual click happy relief of being back in control felt like stepping onto thin ice. The moment I landed on the dashboard, my stomach dropped. Where I should have seen the neat list of my 2 registered properties, the apartment building and my private flat, the system showed something different. There, listed under family-linked assets, was a new entry. Apartment building, primary owner, Clara Mitchell. Secondary access, Lauren Mitchell. Beside it, filled in with a small, innocent checkbox, was capacity for view and edit level permissions. I hadn't granted that. I had never even clicked it. I stared at the screen, the cursor hovering over the Deny button on the original access request I'd opened yesterday, the one that had just sat there waiting for my decision. A second window, a hidden pop-up I hadn't noticed before, now sat in the corner of my screen. Administration, remote access initiated. User, Lauren_Mitchell, requires approval for 72-hour trial. It was timestamped 11:47 p.m. the night before. Mark, I said, my voice louder than I intended. He was in the bathroom, the hum of the hairdryer cutting through the thin wall. I heard the fan click off, and then his footsteps moving toward the bedroom. When he stepped out, still in his towel, he looked at me with that careful, half-aware expression people get when they're half-dressed and half-awake. "What's wrong?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the laptop. I turned the screen toward him slowly. The backlit window lit up his face, giving his skin a pale, almost clinical color. "Someone requested access to my building," I said, "in my name, but I didn't do it." He blinked, reading the screen. "Remote access?" "Yeah, and it's time-stamped late last night, after I went to bed." His jaw tightened. "Just a millimeter." But I noticed. "Clara, it's probably just a glitch, or someone messing with your account. You should change your password or something." "I did," I said quietly, 2 months ago, and I always sign out on shared devices." He stepped closer, leaning slightly over my shoulder, the faint scent of his aftershave mixing with the lingering soap on his skin. "Okay, but did you check if you left the browser open somewhere?" I did, incidentally, and I hadn't. I remembered closing the page the night before, the way I usually did, the way I always did when I didn't want anyone peering over my shoulder. I lifted my gaze to him. "Are you sure you didn't talk to someone about this portal?" I asked. "Because that access request doesn't just appear out of nowhere." He looked away, his eyes drifting to the window, to the sliver of sunlight creeping through the blinds. "I told you, I only mentioned the idea of companies that help with family-linked properties. I didn't give anyone your login." His voice was steady, too steady, the way it always got when he didn't want to sound defensive. I stared at him for a moment longer, and then I felt something shift inside me, not sharply, but like the first crack in a frozen lake. "Let me see your phone," I said. He froze, half turning back toward me. "What?" "Your phone," I repeated, my voice low but firm. "Let me see it." "Clara," he said, "come on, I'm not going to. I just want to see if you have an app from that portal on there," I said. "If you downloaded it, it might have auto-logged in or synced something." He hesitated, then walked over to the dresser, where his phone lay beside his wallet and keys. The wooden surface was cool under my fingertips when I followed, the grain catching a faint streak of dust from the night before's cleaning. He picked up the phone, tapped to unlock it, and then handed it to me without meeting my eyes. I scrolled through the apps, my thumb moving quickly, the familiar icons blurring. Social media, news, weather, notes, photos, games, a handful of utility tools, nothing that looked like a property portal. I opened the browser history, and for a moment the list of addresses scrolled past, website after website, until I saw it, tucked between a job search page and a sports news article. FamilyNestProperties.com. I tapped it open, the screen reloading the page, the glossy, smiling, family-focused property agency layout appearing again. The URL in the address bar read the same, but now, at the bottom, a small banner had appeared. "New! Family Link Portal Integration now available. Connect your properties in minutes." I turned the phone toward Mark, holding it so he could see the screen. "You were on this site," I said quietly. "Yesterday, at 11:42 p.m. His throat moved as he swallowed. "I was just looking at it," he said. "I didn't log into anything." "Then why is there a remote access request on my property page?" I asked. "Why is there a timestamp right after that?" He didn't answer. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thick, the soft ticking of the wall clock ticking louder than it had any right to. The scent of fresh coffee drifted in from the kitchen, where the morning ritual of the espresso machine had started without our involvement, but I barely noticed. "You didn't just look at it," I said, my voice trembling but controlled. "You did something. I don't know what, but you did something. And someone else is using it to get into my accounts." He finally looked at me, and there it was again, that flicker in his eyes, the one that said he was trying to calculate how much to admit, how much to hide, and how much to pretend was nothing. "Clara, calm down," he said, his voice softening into that familiar, placating tone. "We're overthinking. Maybe Lauren's reached out to the company. Maybe she filled out a form. Maybe she's just curious. That doesn't mean she's trying to steal your building." "She already has a form asking me to give her access," I said. "And now there's a portal request right after you were on their website. At the same time, she sent that envelope. That's not curiosity. That's alignment." He started to argue, then stopped, his mouth closing into a thin line. I stood up from the chair, the wood creaking under my weight, the laptop screen still glowing with the cold blue light of betrayal. "I'm calling a lawyer," I said, "and I'm not waiting for this to get worse." His face flushed slightly, the color rising along his jaw. "Wait, just give me a chance to explain." "Explain what?" I asked, my voice rising a fraction, not shouting, but sharper now. "That you've been talking to my cousin and your mother about restructuring my apartment building into some family-owned trust? That you helped them find a way into my property portal? I don't need an explanation, Mark. I need proof that this ends here." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, the silence stretching between us like a taut wire. The espresso machine in the kitchen clicked off with a soft hiss, the aroma of freshly ground coffee drifting into the room, but it felt hollow, like a ritual gone stale. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table, my fingers already moving to the contacts list, tapping on the number I had saved months ago under Lawyer Property Trust. The voicemail picked up after 3 rings, the robotic woman's voice reciting the office hours and the number to leave a message. I left a short, clear one, my words firm, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my chest. When I hung up, I turned back to Mark, who was still standing there, one hand gripping the edge of the dresser, his knuckles pale. "We're not doing this alone," I said. "If my relatives think they can just waltz into my building and start handing out access keys like party favors, they're going to find out who actually owns the door." He swallowed again, the sound barely audible, but I heard it anyway. That afternoon, I went to the lawyer's office, a small, well-lit suite on the 3rd floor of a quiet brick building downtown. The waiting room smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaner and old paper, the kind of clean that comes from years of law school books stacked on shelves behind the receptionist's desk. The lawyer's name was Daniel, a man in his late 50s with a thin salt and pepper beard and a calm, steady gaze that made you want to believe he'd already seen everything you could throw at him. I sat across from him in the small conference room, the glass table between us cool under my palms, the faint hum of the air conditioning filling the silence. I opened my laptop again, the screen displaying the same tangled web of access requests and timestamps, and explained everything from the envelope in the building's mailbox to the family-linked portal, to the app on Mark's phone. He listened without interrupting, his fingers occasionally tapping a pen against the notepad in front of him, the sound rhythmic and grounding. When I finished, he leaned back slightly, the chair creaking under his weight, and tapped his pen against the edge of the table. "They're trying to create a narrative," he said finally, "one where your family has a legitimate stake in that building, where they're framed as protective co-owners or managers, and you're the irrational one who's overprotecting family property." "Family property," I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "It's mine. My name is on the deed." "It is," he said, "which is why what they're doing is legally dangerous for them. If they've been trying to access your accounts, request remote control, or push any kind of family-linked ownership structure without your explicit written consent, they're skating on thin ice. At best, it's a breach of security and privacy. At worst, it's a prelude to a hostile takeover of your property." I felt the blood rush to my ears, the pounding of my heart echoing in the quiet room. "A hostile takeover," I whispered. "Exactly," he said. "They're calculating that you won't fight back, that you'll feel guilty, that you'll give in to keep the peace. But if we push back now, with clear evidence and proper documentation, we can turn this into a situation where they're the ones under pressure, not you." I spent the next hour with him, going over each step, documenting each timestamp, saving screenshots, printing copies, signing documents, and setting up a plan. He advised me to revoke any pending access immediately, block any third-party links, and ensure that any future changes to the building's ownership would require both my signature and verification through a separate, secure channel. When I left the office, the afternoon sun had shifted across the sky, casting long shadows over the street, the warm light cutting through the glass-fronted storefronts. The air smelled faintly of the city's usual mix: car exhaust, street food, and the occasional whiff of fresh flowers from a nearby flower stand vendor, whose cart I passed on the way to the train. I didn't go home directly. Instead, I stopped by the apartment building, the one that had been my anchor, my sanctuary, and for the first time, the place where I felt like I had something real. I let myself in through the front door, the familiar creak of the hinges greeting me like an old friend, the lobby's faint scent of floor wax, and the faint aroma of someone's cooking drifting from one of the units. I walked up the stairs, the wooden steps creaking under my shoes, the cool metal of the handrail brushing against my fingers. The hallway was quiet. The only sounds the faint hum of the refrigerator in one of the units and the distant murmur of a television through a thin wall. I reached the top floor and stood in front of the door to my small office, the one I had converted from the old storage room, where I kept the building's files, the tenant contracts, and the maintenance logs. I opened the door and stepped inside, the smell of old paper and the faint scent of coffee from the mug I had left behind the day before greeting me. The room was small but tidy, the shelves lined with labeled binders, the desk cluttered with sticky notes and a few rental management forms. I walked over to the computer, the familiar whir of the fan starting up as I turned it on, the screen glowing to life with the same calm, neutral blue that I always saw. I logged into the property portal again, this time from the office computer, which had never been connected to any family-linked accounts. The dashboard loaded, and there it was again. The access request, the timestamp, the cold blue text taunting me. I moved my mouse to the denial box, hovered over it for a moment, then clicked. The screen refreshed, and the access request vanished, replaced by a small note, access denied, user permissions revoked. I sat back in the chair, the leather creaking under my weight, the faint sound of the city's distant hum seeping through the thin walls. The air felt different, somehow, cooler, sharper, as if the room had exhaled. The building was still mine, the lock was still mine, the keys were still mine. But I knew, as clearly as I had ever known anything, that the line had been drawn. From there, the game would change. I didn't confront Lauren and Brenda that weekend. I wanted to, of course. I wanted to storm into the cafe where they usually met on Sunday mornings, slam the printed screenshots on the table, and watch their carefully manicured masks crack. But Daniel had warned me, don't play their emotional game. They want drama. You give them cold, documented facts. So instead, I spent the weekend quietly fortifying my position. I revoked every access, reset all passwords, and enabled two-factor authentication on the portal, the bank, and every account connected to the building. I printed copies of deeds, contracts, and emails, stacking them neatly in a thick folder that I labeled Evidence in bold black marker. The first real confrontation came on a Tuesday evening when Brenda called again. This time, her voice carried a different tone. Not faux warmth, but a sharper, more urgent edge. "Clara, we need to talk," she said, as if we were in the middle of something she had been planning for weeks. "Lauren and I have been thinking about this property situation, and we're worried you're not seeing the full picture." We're not friends anymore, I thought, but I kept my voice calm. "What picture?" I asked. "The picture of you being overwhelmed," she said, "of you being alone in this. You're not married to that building, you're married to Mark. We just want to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I said. "From owning my own property." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her struggling to recalibrate. "You know what I mean," she said at last, softer now, as if she were trying to sprinkle sugar over steel. "We want to help you manage it, together, as a family. You don't have to do this alone." I stood in the kitchen, the counter cool under my palms, the faint scent of the lemon-scented cleaner I had used earlier still hanging in the air. The kettle had just finished boiling behind me. its soft whistle cutting through the silence. I looked out the small window above the sink where the faint lights of the city skyline shimmered in the distance, and for a moment I felt the old urge to apologize, to soften, to say, "You're right, I'm not used to this." But then I remembered the access request, the timestamp, the way Mark's jaw had tightened when I asked him about the portal. "Brenda," I said slowly, "I appreciate that you and Lauren care, but that building is mine. My name is on the deed. My money paid for it. My decisions run it. If you want to help, the way to help is to stop trying to log into my accounts and start by asking me directly for permission." Her breath caught just slightly, the way it does when someone you thought you could control surprises you. "No one's trying to log into your accounts," she said too quickly. "You're being paranoid, Clara. You're letting your stress get to you." There it was again, the gaslighting, the quiet attempt to paint me as the unstable one. I felt the familiar knot of anger tighten in my chest, but this time it didn't feel hot, like a storm I couldn't control. It felt cold, focused, like a blade sharpened in the dark. "Then explain this," I said, and I opened my email, pulling up the screenshots of the access request, the timestamp, and the family-linked portal page. I sent them all to Brenda in one neat email, then put the phone on speaker. "Tell me directly, who filled out that request? Who initiated that remote access, and why it happened the same night you and Mark were talking about family-linked property options?" Silence. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock, and the distant honk of a car somewhere outside. When Brenda finally spoke, her voice had changed. The fake warmth was gone, replaced by something harder, more brittle. "Clara, you're crossing a line," she said. "You're accusing your own family of what exactly? Trying to steal from you?" I tightened my grip on the phone. "I'm accusing someone," I said, "of trying to get into my property portal without my permission. If it's not you or Lauren or Mark, then tell me who it is, right now. Because if I have to go to the police to find out, I will." The word police hung in the air between us like a suspended weight. I could hear her breathing, quicker now, the soft rustle of what sounded like papers being shuffled. "Let me call you back," she said finally, her voice clipped. "We need to talk about this." "No," I said. "We don't. You have until tomorrow evening to provide a written explanation, signed, not just an email, and a statement from Lauren confirming that she did not attempt to access my building's records. If you don't provide that, I'm sending everything to my lawyer, and we'll take this one step higher." I hung up before she could argue, the click of the phone cutting off her indignant protests. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier, but I wasn't afraid. For the first time since I had inherited the building, I felt like I was in control of my own life, not just reacting to whatever someone else wanted to pour onto my plate. That evening, Mark came home later than usual, his footsteps heavy on the stairs, the door creaking as he pushed it open. The smell of evening rain drifted in with him, mixing with the faint scent of coffee I had left brewing on the countertop. He looked exhausted, his tie slightly loosened, his hair ruffled from the wind. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, hanging his coat on the rack by the door. His voice was low, almost tentative. I sat at the dining table, my hands folded in front of me, the folder of printed documents open beside my laptop. The screen still showed the email thread with Brenda, the screenshots glowing palely in the dim light. "About the portal," he went on. "I thought I was just helping. Lauren said she was worried about you, that you were stressed, that you didn't understand how taxes work. She said if we could share control, It would protect you in case something happened. I looked up at him, my eyes steady. Did you know she had sent that access request? He hesitated, his gaze flicking to the ceiling, then back to me. I didn't know the exact form, he said. I knew she was looking into something. I didn't think it was serious. She already had your login, I said quietly. She already had a way in. You didn't just help. You opened the door. His shoulders sagged, the weight of the truth settling on him like a physical blow. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. I thought it was just paperwork, just options. Options, I repeated, that you didn't tell me about. He didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. The air smelled faintly of the jasmine air freshener I had sprayed earlier, but it felt thin, like a bandage over a wound. You need to choose, I said finally, right now. You can stay on their side and keep playing the game where they decide what happens to my property, or you can stand with me, cut off any access they've tried to take, and let this be over. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine, the way they used to when we were first dating, when he was still trying to figure out who I was. For a second, I thought he might walk out, that he might retreat to the safe, familiar place of family loyalty and quiet avoidance. But then he sank into the chair across from me, the wood creaking under his weight. I'm with you, he said, his voice low but firm. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I let them in. I'll talk to Brenda and to Lauren, and I'll make sure they stop. I'll help you set up whatever protections you need. It wasn't a perfect answer. It didn't erase the betrayal, the months of quiet manipulation, the way they had tried to reshape my life without asking. But it was a start. The next day, Brenda and Lauren met me in the small conference room of the lawyer's office, the same room where I had first laid out my evidence. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his calm, steady presence filling the space like a buffer between us. Brenda looked tense, her carefully made-up face a little too tight around the eyes, her hand clutching her purse as if it might anchor her. Lauren sat beside her, her posture rigid, her fingers twisting a small ring on her right hand. Daniel laid out the documents one by one, each page a reminder of their failed attempt to claim control. He explained the legal consequences of unauthorized access, the potential charges, the risk to their own businesses if they continued to push. When he was done, the room felt heavy, the air thick with the weight of their own overreach. Brenda finally spoke, her voice weaker now, stripped of its usual confidence. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Clara," she said. "We just wanted to be part of it, to be close to you." I looked at her, at the woman who had always smiled too much and listened too little, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to comfort her. "You wanted to be part of it," I said, "on your terms. You wanted to own it, to control it, to take something that's mine and make it yours. That's not closeness. That's greed." She flinched, the word landing like a slap. Lauren shifted in her chair, her eyes darting to the door as if she was already planning her escape. "From now on," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "if you want to be part of my life, you do it on my terms. No more access to my accounts. No more forms. No more family-linked anything. If you want to visit, you call first. If you want to talk about the building, you come through me, directly. Any attempt to bypass that, any attempt to get in without my permission will be treated as hostile and dealt with accordingly." Brenda opened her mouth to protest, but Daniel held up a hand. "I'd think very carefully about what you say next," he said. Your niece has every right to protect her property. If you choose to continue this road, you won't be the victim, you'll be the one standing in court." They left an hour later, the sound of their footsteps fading down the hallway, the faint click of the elevator doors closing behind them. I stayed behind with Daniel, looking over the final documents, the signatures, and the revocation forms. When I walked out of the office that evening, the building didn't feel like a fortress under siege anymore. It felt like home. Weeks passed. The building continued to run smoothly, the tenants happy, the rent reliable. I hired a small independent management company to help with day-to-day operations, someone who answered to me and only me. The smell of the hallway changed slowly. The old lemon-scented cleaner replaced with a fresher, cleaner fragrance, a subtle reminder that the space was mine, shaped by my choices. One evening, I sat on the small balcony of my flat, the same one where I had first celebrated my success, the city lights shimmering below me like tiny stars. The air was cool, the faint sound of traffic and distant laughter drifting up from the streets. I held a mug of tea in my hands, the warmth seeping into my palms, the taste of mint cutting through the stillness. Mark sat beside me, his arm resting lightly on the back of the chair, his presence a quiet anchor rather than a source of tension. We didn't talk about the building, at least not that night. We talked about other things, small things, the way you do when the storm has passed and you're learning how to breathe again. Later, when the lights had dimmed and the city had settled into its nightly rhythm, I stood in the hallway of the apartment building, the one where the envelope had first appeared, where the access request had first appeared on my screen. The hallway felt different now, not just in the way I had repainted the walls, but in the way it carried a sense of ownership, not invasion. I walked up the stairs, my footsteps echoing softly, the leather of my shoes brushing against the wood. At the top, I paused in front of the door to my small office, my hand resting on the brass doorknob. I turned it slowly, the lock clicking as it opened, the scent of paper and coffee filling the room. I sat at the desk, my fingers brushing over the neat stack of documents, the deeds, the contracts, the revocation forms, all signed, all mine. For a long time, I just sat there, the faint hum of the city seeping through the walls, the distant sound of a child laughing in another unit, the soft creak of the building settling. The air smelled like home, like victory, like something that had been fought for and earned. I thought back to the first time I had walked into this building after my grandmother's funeral, the way the air had felt heavy with grief and possibility. I had never imagined then that the building would be the anchor that held me together when my family tried to drag me down. Now it was more than property. It was proof that I could stand on my own, that I could say no, that I could fight for what was mine without losing myself in the process. The last time I visited the cafe on the corner, the one with the chipped blue paint and the chipped mug I always sat at, the barista handed me my usual order with a warm smile. The smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls filled the air, wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. I sat at my usual window seat, the city lights shimmering beyond the glass, the faint hum of conversation filling the room. I opened my laptop, the screen glowing softly, the property portal dashboard loading with its familiar, calm blue interface. The only entries under my name were the ones I had chosen, the ones I had signed, the ones I had fought for. There were no access requests, no remote control, no family-linked portals trying to claim what was mine. I closed the laptop, the click of the screen snapping shut, feeling final, like the closing of a book that had been left open too long. The city outside continued to move, the lights flickering, the streets alive with their own stories. I stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor, the chipped mug left half empty on the table. I walked out into the cool evening air, the faint scent of rain and city dust mingling in my nose. The building was still there, waiting for me, not as a prize, not as a battlefield, but as my own, my sanctuary, my proof that I had stared into the eyes of my relative's greed and said quietly, firmly, no. And that, more than the keys, more than the deeds, more than the money, was the real inheritance.